vague title. The music's ominous. I think this is a game about fish. The name was Dagon. Everything had all the images I could find had fish related things. I saw like that picture and I was like, okay, that's a decent enough thumbnail. So yeah, Dagon.
I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more.
Alright. Makes sense. Oh wait. I was really waiting for like... Has Daddy been alive this whole time? Oh no, he's only been alive for 30 minutes. Yeah, I don't care. I'm playing fish game. Alright. Alright. In order to find these secrets, focus and look for that elder sign. As to my letters, my case is peculiar. I write such things exactly as easily and rapidly as I would utter the same topics in conversations. Indeed, I can't pronounce that word expression is with me largely replacing conversation. As my condition and nervous prostration becomes more and more acute, I cannot bear it. Now, I'm becoming as silent as a spectator himself. My loquacity extends itself on paper. H.P. Lovecraft to Reinhard Kleiner, December 23rd, 1917. To his friends and fans, 10% of which survive today, but this tendency to endless correspondence was a relatively late growth. In youth, I scarcely did any letter writing, thanking anybody for a present as much as an ordeal that I would rather have written 250-line pastoral or 20-page treatise on the rings of Saturn. Lovecraft would often skip meals to afford postage. Collections of his correspondence have been published in various books, and selected letters can be found online. Some readers consider them his most important legacy. That's an interesting piece of Lovecraft lore.
Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below.
Okay.
Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate.
Oh, my speaker, no.
When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death.
Alright. Oh, there's a... Morphine introduced in the 19th century, blah blah blah, was sold without restrictions until 1914. I mean, this is just a fun little experience.
It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider.
Alright.
The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation,
Alright.
so that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners.
Oh, Lord.
So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time.
Alright. So, the story
When I
so
finally
far,
found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings.
So the story so far, from what I'm getting, this guy's crazy. He's about to kill himself, but he's retailing the story of why he's doing this before he does it, which I guess makes sense.
Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator.
How can you tell that, my good friend?
Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight.
Well, yeah, you need a clock to be able to determine longitude.
The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land.
Yeah, fun fact. Before the invention of GPS, you needed a clock set to a certain time to be able to navigate in the world. Which I always find quite strange. They based longitude off a small town in London, and you basically needed a chronometer, aka a really precise clock, to be able to determine where the hell you are around the world. Well, not latitudinally, just because you can look at the stars for that, but longitudinally, I'm going to explain it.
But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept.
What do you mean the change?
Its details I shall never know,
What do you mean?
for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous.
Octopus?
When at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished. For there was in the air, and in the rotting soil, a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core.
Sinister. always find the squids very funny. Like, look at this one. Goofy looking thing.
The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish and of other, less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain.
That's like a nautilus shell. You can still find those things.
Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity.
I mean, if I just woke up in an endless black mire, I would be kind of concerned as well. Especially if there's fish everywhere.
There was nothing within hearing and nothing in sight save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet.
Yeah, I don't like that one. I don't like that one.
As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position.
What do you mean?
Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, straining my ears as I might.
Oh yeah, that's...
Nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things.
Yeah, typically, even in like the far ocean, there'd probably be like a dozen of birds, wouldn't there? And the fact that you couldn't hear an ocean on an island that you just sort of woke up on with your boat is also disturbing if you think about it, right? The ocean's loud. You can like hear that for like easily a few miles inland if you pay close attention and it's properly quiet. Alright, where does this go next?
For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for travelling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue.
Alright.
On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease.
Yeah, they use the same texture.
The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal.
Just walking out into the muddy expanse in search of the ocean.
All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert.
Are these like the bugs from Starship Trooper they used as the acids? Oh, that's just an entire fucking whale. I always get disturbed when I think about how a beached whale is fully conscious when it's on the beach, right? Just imagine being like trapped somewhere where you can't move.
That night I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it. base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance.
Well, that's how depth perception
An
is.
intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the solid surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night. But ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain.
Gibbous moon. What's gibbous moon mean?
I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again. And in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy.
Yeah, but I can't see.
Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence.
Well. If you insist.
I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night.
Interesting.
Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost, and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent,
What the hell is that then?
whilst after a drop of only a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual.
Alright.
Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps, where no light had yet penetrated.
Stygian, I can't see anything.
All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me.
Cute.
An object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself.
I mean,
But I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature.
yeah, that's like a very straight edge.
A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express.
Well, what do you mean?
For despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss that yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures.
I mean,
Dazed and frightened,
square
yet
stones
not
don't
without a
just naturally
certain
create
thrill at the
themselves.
scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith,
Very bold descriptor.
on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound.
Ooh, we got a fact. Dagon contains many themes and storytellings that Lovecraft debated later in his work, such as telling the story through carvings at the Mountains of Madness, the names, journals, and characters' notes, the Shadow Out of Time, the Hunter's Dark, islands and moon emerging from the ocean, the Call of Voodoo, or fictional beings and deities based on real events and mythologies. Migo and the Whisper in Darkness. It's also considered the origin of the popular Cthulhu mythos. Some of Lovecraft's later sources which also conclude in a manner similar to Dagon. Let's keep the details in order not to spoil the ending. Actually, I'm completely unfamiliar with Lovecraft's work.
Plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a doré.
A doré?
I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint, grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seem to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background, for one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Fiend-like and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the sloping cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little. I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing. Nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe.
Lovecraft was a prominent figure in the world of amateur journalism. In 1915, he started publishing his own journal called The Conservative, which he included political and social commentary, poetry, short stories, and literary criticisms written by him and other authors. Howard was a skilled wordsmith, but he also took criticism to heart, which resulted in him. I forget Lovecraft's real name is Howard. To step away from writing poetry and country and weird fiction again for the first time since his teenage years, Dagon published in 1919 was one of the short stories written during that period. In an example excerpt, The Conservative, the master of horror fiction explains his attitude towards warfare and the idea of world peace. Any sane human being can believe in the possibility of universal peace is more than the conservative can fathom. Should the entire civilized world agree on simultaneously to disarm one or more nations who would undoubtedly retain secret armaments, and at a proper time take advantage of the more altruistic and less astute contemporaries in a wild career of conquest against the unarmed victims. No country is or ever can be above warfare until the basic impulses of the human animal shall have been miraculously changed. I guess if I was to stake this in a serious notion, it's believable. I don't believe world peace like that is truly possible. Where we all just, throw all the death rays and the fucking AKs in a burn pile. It makes sense. Man, this is just pointing me towards a bunch of Lovecraft media to look at. This isn't a bad thing.
Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god.
Dagon was the main deity of the Philistines worshipped throughout the Middle East as the ancient god of fertility and crops. In Hebrew, the word Dagon was a common noun for grain. The rulers of Akkad, Mesopotamia, chose him as the patron saint of their war crust. He also appeared as the judge of the dead in an Assyrian poem and an underworld prison warder of in one of the Babylonian texts. He's often mistakenly taken for a fish god due to the wrong interpretation of his name. In Hebrew, the word dag means fish. In HP, Dagron is an underwater deity ruling over the deep ones, a humanoid race with fish traits that resides in the oceans. He is worshipped by a secret cult called the Esoteric Order of Dagon. What an intriguing notion. H.P. Lovecraft making Dagon the fish god was based off a misinterpretation of Dagon as a name. Because Dag in Hebrew means fish, but Dagan means grain. What an interesting notion.
But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries.
August Derleth and the Cthulhu Mysteries. August Derleth was an American writer and anthologist. He also befriended Lovecraft and posited many through his company's Arkham House. Although he greatly contributed to the popularization of the author's work, so Lovecraft's work, or Howard's work, he is surrounded by numerous controversies. One of his most questionable decisions involved introducing the good versus evil doctrine. Derleth was to devote Catholics to the Cthulhu's mythos, which contrasted with Lovecraft's view of the world and his approach to cosmic horror. As a result, the author's works are often misunderstood and misinterpreted in today's culture. It's also worth noting that Lovecraft was never really interested in creating a mythology. The term Cthulhu mythos was coined by Derleth after the author left the mortal plane. You didn't have to, you could just say he died. You didn't have to, you know what, I'm gonna let you cook. Wait, that's the Necronomicon. Yoink. Lovecraft's attempt to find a job in 1925 were influenced by advice he received from his friends. Among others, he started freelancing for a marketing magazine where he would write announcements and commercials. Feel free to judge his copywriting skills for yourself. An ad for Curtis Woodworks. Curtis Woodwork embraces both the unusual structural units and the cleverest intricacies of built-in permanent furniture, such as bookcases, dressers, buffets, and cupboards. Every model is conceived and created with the purest art, ripest scholarship, and the mellowest craftsmanship which energetic enterprise can command, and made to conform rigidly to the architecture of each particular type of home. The cost, considering the quality, is amazingly low, and a trademark on individual pieces prevents any substitution by careless contractors. Oh, honestly, if I saw this ad, I would be interested. I mean, this would require me reading a newspaper, and I can barely read. So, take that as you will. The word scientist is a widely accepted term, but at the time of Dagon it was subject to wide debate. After the author used it in a story, critics pointed out man of science was a more appropriate term to employ. He admitted, in defense of Dagon, that if Dagon were to be reprinted, he would indeed use the phrase they suggested. Scientist was coined as an analog to artist, to be used referring to those studying the different branches of science. Yes, in 19th and 20th century, scientific researchers in Great Britain and the United States were of the opinion that man of science, resembling the term man of letters, was the only proper choice. Among the things, it was gender-specific, indicating that science was only endeavored to be pursued by men. Alright, that makes sense. The term scientist became more accepted after World War II, and man of science started fading into obscurity as an old-fashioned synonym. Man, this is giving me all the Lovecraft lore. I mean, I'm certainly going to look into reading one of these books.
It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing.
I see the thing.
I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease, and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men. Often I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man of war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down into their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it.
Go one last check for any secrets, any factoids.
It shall not find me. God, that hand! The window! The window!
Very interesting. Honestly, I'm gonna just read H.P. Lovecraft's works later. Maybe on stream.
And scary stories have been accompanying men for centuries. They have many faces and forms, but what is their purpose?
I don't know, you tell me.
Why do we enjoy being afraid so much?
I don't know, you tell me.
During our therapy, I'll try to
Oh, you're just giving me advertisements. Alright. What? I missed that much. There's more? I don't know, I might have to go through this one again. Thanks for everybody coming to the stream.